The warm summer evening was supposed to be a simple celebration, a neighborhood block party where families gathered to share laughter and stories under the fading light. I stood near the grill, flipping burgers while keeping an eye on my daughter, Emma. She was 12, bright-eyed and full of curiosity, her hearing aid nestled carefully behind her ear, a lifeline that connected her to the world around her. That little device was more than just technology. It was her bridge to every sound, every whispered secret, every word I spoke softly to her when she needed comfort. Tonight, like always, she wore it with quiet pride, though the occasional frustration flickered in her gaze when the device picked up too much noise or failed to catch something important. I was proud of how she handled her hearing challenges with such grace, but being at a party meant the usual hustle and bustle could sometimes overwhelm her. Still, she smiled, laughing at a joke from a neighbor while I felt the usual mix of relief and protectiveness wash over me. Our community was tight-knit but not without its tensions, especially when it came to the Homeowners Association. Karen Wilkins, the HOA president, had a reputation for making life difficult for anyone who didn't toe her line. Her sharp eyes scanned the crowd like a hawk, always ready to catch any small infraction and wield her authority like a weapon. No one outside of close circles knew I was the Deputy Commissioner of Public Safety for the county, a job that demanded discretion and calm authority. I preferred to keep my professional life separate from our neighborhood's dramas, especially on nights like this. My role gave me tools and power that most didn't have, but here, among neighbors and familiar faces, I wanted to be just a father enjoying an evening with his daughter. Emma's laughter softened the edges of my day, reminding me why I worked so hard to protect her and give her a life full of chances, not limitations. As the sun dipped behind the trees and the music swelled, I felt a creeping unease settle in my chest. Something was off tonight, though I couldn't yet put my finger on it. Emma's smile wavered briefly as she shifted in the grass, adjusting her hearing aid. I reached down and brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear, telling myself to enjoy this moment, because whatever was coming, it was about to change everything. The party was in full swing by the time twilight settled over the neighborhood. Children ran in circles around the yard, their laughter ringing out over the hum of quiet conversations and the occasional clink of glasses. Tables were laden with homemade dishes and colorful drinks, and the scent of grilled meat mixed with the soft aroma of blooming flowers. For a moment, it seemed like the kind of evening where the usual worries could be pushed aside, replaced by simple joy and community warmth. Emma stayed close to me, her fingers lightly gripping mine as she moved through the crowd. Her hearing aid occasionally beeped with background noise, but she smiled bravely, eager to be part of the fun despite the overwhelming soundscape. I admired her resilience and reminded myself that these moments were important to her, a chance to belong, to connect, to feel normal in a world that often felt distant and loud. Then, I saw her. Karen Wilkins made her way through the gathering with a practiced air of authority. She was impeccably dressed in a crisp blouse and tailored slacks, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun that seemed to reflect the rigid control she exerted over this community. Her eyes scanned the scene like a judge passing verdicts without mercy. She stopped briefly at each group, nodding sharply, her smile tight and measured. There was no warmth in it, just the calculated politeness of someone used to wielding power rather than sharing it. Karen was the kind of person who thrived on control, her reputation in the neighborhood well known to those who'd had the misfortune of crossing her path. The HOA president wasn't just a figurehead. She was the one who handed out fines for forgotten trash cans, who issued warnings over the color of front doors, who insisted on rigid schedules for lawn maintenance. Her voice carried a sharpness that silenced arguments before they began, and her presence was enough to make many shrink back, wary of inviting her ire. I watched as she approached our group, her eyes flicking to Emma's hearing aid with what I thought was a hint of disdain or maybe impatience. It was the kind of look that dismissed difference as a nuisance, something inconvenient to be managed rather than accepted. I tightened my grip on Emma's hand and subtly moved her closer, a silent shield against whatever storm Karen might bring. Karen's gaze shifted to me, and I met it evenly, giving nothing away. She was unaware of who I was, the authority I held, and that was likely how she preferred it. In the neighborhood, she was the queen, and everyone else her subjects to be kept in line. But beneath that polished exterior, I sensed something brittle, a hunger for control that masked deeper insecurities. As she lingered a moment longer than necessary, commenting on the decorations with thinly veiled criticism, Emma's smile began to fade. The noise around us grew louder, and I noticed the way her hand tightened around mine, how she seemed to shrink just a little. Karen's presence cast a shadow that few dared to cross, and tonight I feared my daughter might be caught in it. The crowd buzzed with casual chatter, but a tension settled between us that no one else seemed to notice. I kept my voice steady when I finally spoke to Karen, careful to maintain the calm exterior that had served me well in countless official dealings. "It's a good night for the neighborhood," I said, my tone neutral but firm. Karen's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, well, it could always be better," she replied, the subtle edge in her voice warning that she was already measuring everything and everyone against some impossible standard. Emma shifted again, and I bent slightly to whisper in her ear, "Stay close. We're just here to enjoy the evening." But even as I spoke, I knew this night was already veering towards something far more complicated than a simple neighborhood party. The music was louder now, a mix of laughter and conversations swirling through the air like an invisible tide. Emma was standing near the picnic table, her attention caught by a group of kids playing a game of charades. She tried to follow their movements and guess the clues, her hearing aid picking up the jumbled sounds around her but not quite separating the voices clearly. I watched her from across the yard, pride mixing with a pang of concern. Even in the chaos, she kept trying, determined not to let anything hold her back. Karen was nearby, pacing slowly, as if overseeing the entire event with a ruler tucked in her mind. She glanced over at Emma with a look that was impossible to read, something like impatience crossed with annoyance. I tightened my jaw and took a few steps closer to my daughter, wanting to keep her safe from whatever storm Karen was brewing. Suddenly, there was a sharp voice cutting through the noise. Karen was speaking loudly to a couple of teenagers who had left their bikes leaning too close to the flower beds. Her tone was clipped and commanding, the kind that didn't invite argument. Emma turned her head, distracted by the sudden flare of tension. She shifted her weight, and in that moment, the hearing aid caught on the edge of the picnic bench. I saw it happen before I could react. Karen stepped backward without looking, her heel connecting with Emma's small hearing aid lying on the grass beside the bench. There was a sickening crunch, almost like a tiny glass breaking underfoot. Emma's eyes went wide with shock, and her hand flew to her ear. "Mom," she whispered, voice trembling. I rushed to her side, kneeling down and gently lifting her hand away from the mangled device. The plastic casing was cracked, wires poking out in a tangle. Emma's face crumpled, tears welling up as she stared at the ruined aid. The sound of the party seemed to grow distant, muffled by the weight of what had just happened. Karen turned slowly, as if realizing for the first time what she had done. Her lips pressed into a thin line, but there was no apology, no sign of regret. Instead, she looked almost bored, as if this was just another inconvenience in her perfect little world. "Accidents happen," she said flatly, shrugging as if the broken hearing aid was nothing more than a trampled flower. I felt a surge of anger rise inside me, but I swallowed it, trying to keep calm for Emma's sake. "That was her hearing aid," I said firmly, voice low but steady. "You crushed it." Karen's eyes flicked to me, sharp and calculating. "I didn't see it," she replied dismissively. If she'd kept it out of the way, none of this would have happened. My heart hammered. To hear her blame Emma was like a punch in the gut. My daughter looked up at me, tears streaming freely now, confusion and hurt mixing in her gaze. I reached out and pulled her into a gentle hug, trying to shield her from the coldness of Karen's words. Other neighbors had begun to notice, murmurs spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Some looked uncomfortable, unsure where to stand. A few exchanged glances that said they had seen Karen's temper before but preferred to stay out of it. I caught a few eyes that held silent sympathy, but no one stepped forward yet. "Emma needs a replacement," I said, voice stronger now, "and we'll need to talk about how this happened." Karen raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smirk playing on her lips. "I'm sure she'll get it fixed. There's no need to make a fuss." But I wasn't about to let this go. Not when it was my daughter who had been hurt. The party's easy laughter and light-hearted chatter had been replaced by a tension thick enough to cut with a knife. And as I looked down at Emma's trembling hands and the crushed device, I knew this was only the beginning of a battle that neither Karen nor I could avoid. The moment hung heavy between us, charged with an electricity that neither Karen nor I could ignore. I still held Emma close, her small body trembling against mine as she tried to steady her breath. Her hearing aid lay in my hand, broken and useless, a cruel symbol of everything she depended on to navigate a world that didn't always make sense to her. I glanced up at Karen, whose eyes gleamed with a mixture of defiance and something colder, like a challenge daring me to make more of this. I kept my voice calm, measured, but there was no mistaking the undercurrent of steel beneath the words. Karen, this isn't something you can just walk away from. Emma's hearing aid is damaged because of you. It needs to be replaced, and you owe her an apology. The neighbors around us began to quiet down, their attention shifting to the tension crackling in the air. Karen tilted her head slightly, a sardonic smile curling the corner of her mouth. An apology? That seems a bit much for what was clearly an accident. She should have been more careful with her things. Her words felt like cold water thrown over a fire that was barely contained inside me. I stepped forward, keeping my tone steady despite the heat rising in my chest. Emma is careful every day. She relies on that device. It's not just a toy or a convenience. It's how she hears the world. You should have been paying attention. The gathering crowd watched silently now, some shifting uncomfortably, others exchanging knowing glances. Karen's gaze hardened. I am responsible for this neighborhood. I don't have time to babysit every child's equipment. She waved a dismissive hand, as if brushing away my concerns. Maybe if people followed the rules, there wouldn't be so many problems. Her implication hung there, sharp and cruel, targeting more than just the hearing aid. I fought the urge to snap back, to let anger take over, but I swallowed it down and focused on Emma instead. She looked up at me, eyes wide and searching for reassurance. I knelt beside her, smoothing her hair gently. We'll get this fixed, sweetheart. I promise. Karen scoffed softly, shaking her head as if I were making mountains out of molehills. Don't expect the HOA to cover the cost. That's not our responsibility. The words hit me like a blow. Here was someone who wielded power in this community but cared little for the people she was supposed to serve. I took a deep breath, holding back the urge to expose the full extent of my authority right there and then. I knew better than to let emotions rule, even when my daughter's well-being was on the line. We'll see about that, I said quietly, my voice low but carrying an unmistakable warning. The neighbors began to murmur again, some expressing sympathy quietly, while others looked away, unwilling to get involved. It was clear the divide was growing, the invisible fault lines beneath the polite facade of this community becoming more apparent. I caught a glance from Mrs. Harper, an elderly woman who had always been kind to Emma. Her eyes flicked to Karen with a mixture of pity and quiet disapproval. Karen, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, straightened her posture and fixed me with a cold stare. I think that's enough drama for one evening. Let's not turn a neighborhood party into a courtroom. Her voice was sharp but forced, revealing the cracks beneath her carefully maintained composure. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral but determined. The evening is far from over, Karen. This matter will be addressed properly. I gathered Emma's hand once more and stepped away, feeling the weight of eyes following us as we moved toward the edge of the gathering. Emma leaned into me, whispering, "Mom, why did she do that? Was it on purpose?" Her voice trembled with confusion and hurt. I held her tightly, fighting back my own anger and sadness. "I don't know, baby, but I promise you, we'll make sure it doesn't happen again." As we walked away from the crowd, the festive mood had clearly fractured. The laughter had faded, replaced by a quiet unease that settled over the neighborhood like a heavy fog. The damage was more than just the hearing aid. It was the first crack in a fragile piece, a sign that Karen's reign might be far from as secure as she believed. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of a fight that would test everything I was willing to do to protect my daughter. Later that night, after the party had broken up and the neighborhood had quieted, I sat alone in the dim light of the living room, Emma asleep upstairs. The weight of the evening pressed down on me, heavier than I had expected. Seeing my daughter so vulnerable, her precious hearing aid crushed under Karen's careless foot, stirred something fierce inside me. It was more than just anger. It was a deep, protective urge that burned with every thought of how much Emma depended on that small device. I replayed the moments over and over the way Karen had looked at Emma, the coldness in her voice when she dismissed the damage, the casual cruelty that had no place in a community that was supposed to be supportive. I had always known Karen was difficult, but this felt different. This was personal, crossing a line that couldn't be ignored. Yet, as much as I wanted to confront her outright, my position as deputy commissioner required careful planning. I couldn't simply storm in wielding my title like a weapon. The balance of power was delicate, and the community depended on me to act judiciously, to be the calm in the storm. But calm did not mean passive. I needed to find a way to hold Karen accountable, to protect Emma, and to send a message that this kind of behavior would not be tolerated. I thought about the HOA's rules and regulations, the fines and restrictions Karen so eagerly enforced on everyone else, but never seemed to answer to herself. If there was any place to start, it would be there, using the system against her own abuse of power. But I also knew the importance of allies. Quiet conversations with trusted colleagues, gathering facts and documenting everything would be essential. Most of all, I needed to prepare Emma for what was ahead. The road to repairing her hearing aid would not be easy, nor would the battles to come. But she was strong, stronger than most people realized, and I would make sure she never felt alone in this fight. In the quiet hours of that night, I made a silent vow. Karen had crushed more than just a device tonight. She had underestimated me, and she had underestimated what it meant to be a father willing to do whatever it took to protect his child. The next morning, the neighborhood still buzzed with quiet whispers and sideways glances. But for me, the day was about strategy and careful moves. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee cooling beside me, my mind already racing through the options. Being deputy commissioner gave me certain advantages: contacts, access to resources, and a deep understanding of how to navigate bureaucracies. But I knew this wasn't just about wielding power. It was about using that power wisely, ensuring justice without escalating the conflict beyond what was necessary. My first call was to a trusted colleague in the county legal department. I needed to know the exact liabilities of the HOA, and whether Karen's actions, or lack of responsibility, could be challenged through official channels. The HOA was supposed to serve the community, not bully its members. If they had policies covering damages caused by their board members, it was time to bring them forward. I laid out the facts calmly: the hearing aid, the party, Karen's dismissal. The voice on the other end listened carefully, promising to look into relevant statutes and precedents. Next, I reached out to a local audiologist who had worked with Emma since she was a toddler. The doctor confirmed what I already knew: the hearing aid wasn't just expensive, it was essential. Repairs could take weeks, and a replacement would cost a small fortune. I arranged for Emma to get priority service, hoping to minimize the disruption to her life. The audiologist's sympathy and willingness to help reminded me of the kindness that still existed in the world, even when others like Karen seemed determined to spread negativity. Throughout the day, I also began collecting statements from neighbors who had witnessed the incident. Some had been hesitant at first, afraid of Karen's wrath or of getting involved in HOA politics. But as I spoke gently, explaining that this was about fairness and respect, people opened up. Mrs. Harper, the elderly woman who had always treated Emma like a granddaughter, spoke up first, describing Karen's dismissive attitude. A young couple admitted they had quietly complained about Karen's temper before. Each piece of information built a picture of Karen not just as an overbearing HOA president, but as someone who abused her position and disregarded the community's well-being. Meanwhile, I kept a close eye on Emma. She was still shaken, her confidence fragile, but her spirit remained unbroken. I made sure she felt supported and loved, reminding her that Karen's cruelty was not her fault. At night, I read stories to her and helped her practice using the hearing aid's backup features. It wasn't the same, but it was enough to keep her connected while we worked on the real repairs. I also began drafting a letter to the HOA board, carefully worded to avoid unnecessary escalation but firm enough to demand accountability. I highlighted the incident, Karen's refusal to accept responsibility, and the emotional impact on my daughter. I attached copies of the audiologist's notes and the statements from neighbors, laying out the evidence in a clear, undeniable way. The letter made it clear that I expected a formal apology, reimbursement for the hearing aid, and a commitment that the HOA would review its policies to prevent anything like this from happening again. Behind the scenes, I used my contacts to discreetly investigate Karen's tenure as HOA president. There were murmurs of other grievances, ignored complaints, and fines handed out arbitrarily. It became evident she ruled through fear rather than respect, creating an environment that stifled community spirit instead of nurturing it. This information, once compiled, would be crucial in weakening her hold on power and giving the community a chance to reclaim their neighborhood. I avoided revealing my official role openly. It was important Karen and the board saw me first, as a concerned parent and neighbor. The power I held could be a double-edged sword. Wielding it too soon or too harshly might backfire, turning the community against me, or giving Karen the opportunity to paint me as an overbearing authority figure, abusing my position. Days passed with a slow but steady build-up of pressure. The HOA board responded with vague promises to review the situation but avoided directly confronting Karen. I sensed their discomfort. The support from neighbors grew as more shared their frustrations quietly, emboldened by the idea that Karen's unchecked authority might finally be challenged. Late one evening, as I sat in my office, reviewing all the collected evidence and preparing to make the next move, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mrs. Harper, simple but meaningful. "We stand with you." In that moment, the weight of the battle ahead felt lighter. I wasn't alone. Emma wasn't alone. Together, we were ready to face whatever came next. The hearing aid would be fixed. Karen's power would be questioned. And I would make sure that my daughter and every family in this neighborhood could live without fear of being crushed under someone else's careless boot. The night of the HOA meeting arrived with a tension that filled the small community hall like thick fog. Neighbors shuffled in quietly, exchanging cautious glances, the usual chatter replaced by a nervous energy that hinted something was about to break. I sat near the back, Emma beside me, her fingers curled tightly around mine. Her hearing aid was working again, restored to perfect clarity, but the emotional wounds still lingered beneath her calm exterior. Karen entered last, her posture rigid, eyes scanning the room with a practiced air of control. The usual polite nods were replaced by wary looks. She knew the atmosphere had shifted. When the meeting began, I waited until the agenda turned to community concerns before I stood. The room quieted as I spoke, my voice steady but carrying the weight of authority. "I am here tonight not just as a neighbor, but as the Deputy Commissioner of Public Safety," I began, watching the surprise ripple through the crowd. Karen's eyes narrowed, her mask of control faltering for the first time. Recently, an incident occurred at a neighborhood event where my daughter's hearing aid was deliberately crushed. The responsible party is our HOA president, Karen Wilkins. I laid out the facts clearly. The damage, the refusal to take responsibility, the emotional impact on my daughter, and the broader pattern of intimidation Karen had imposed on this community. I presented the statements from neighbors and the documentation from the audiologist, leaving no room for doubt. The room was silent, the weight of truth settling like a verdict. Karen tried to speak, to deny, to deflect, but her voice was weak against the evidence and the steady gaze of the community. One by one, neighbors began to speak up, sharing their own experiences and frustrations. The power Karen had wielded so freely was slipping away, replaced by a collective strength that could no longer be ignored. When the motion to remove Karen from her position was called, the vote was unanimous. The relief that washed over the room was palpable. Emma squeezed my hand, a small smile breaking through her usual reserve. I knew this was more than a victory. It was a new beginning for all of us. As the meeting ended, I looked down at my daughter and whispered, "You were brave tonight." She looked up, her eyes shining with gratitude and hope. Together, we stepped out into the night, ready to face whatever came next stronger, united, and unbroken. In the days that followed the meeting, a quiet calm settled over the neighborhood. The tension that had shadowed our community slowly lifted, replaced by a cautious optimism that felt almost foreign after so long under Karen's rule. The HOA began to change, new leadership emerging with a promise to listen and to serve, not to control. For Emma, life started to feel a little easier. Her hearing aid worked flawlessly, and the smiles she shared were lighter, freer. I often found myself reflecting on how quickly things can shift when people choose to stand together. What began as a simple party had become a turning point, not just for my family, but for everyone who had felt the weight of unfairness and fear. Being deputy commissioner had given me tools and authority, But it was the courage of a community and the resilience of a little girl that truly made the difference. As I watched Emma play in the yard one afternoon, laughing without hesitation, I knew that protecting her meant more than fixing what was broken. It meant fighting for a future where she could thrive, where no one could diminish her light. And in that, I found a strength deeper than any title or office could offer.